Welcome to Block and Order, the show that explores the legal issues facing the world of Web3 and beyond. I'm Kyle Lawrence, and with me, as always, he could do 4 months in the clink standing on his head, Mr. Moish Peltz.
Hello, Kyle. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I think you could. I think you'd be the shot caller pretty quickly if we're being
Is this
honest.
a New Orleans thing? What are we talking about here?
Well, we can get into it later. I did just get back from Jazz Fest. Thank you for noticing. I'm a little tanner than normal. I don't know if it really comes across
This is
like
you being Tanner.
this is me being tanner. Listen, I'm a little pasty white. What can I say? Moish, we have a very special episode on the docket for everybody today. We have with us Justin Wales. Justin is the head of legal for the Americas at Crypto.com and the author of the Crypto Legal Handbook, which is outstanding, and I encourage everybody to read it. We can put a link down in the show notes of where you can acquire it. Justin's also the author of the newsletter of the same name, the cryptolegalhandbook.com/newsletter. We'll put a link to that. Justin, welcome to Block and Order.
Yeah, thanks, guys. You might derail me, and I want to just hear about Jazz Fest and if you saw the Jimmy Buffett tribute.
I saw a slew of Jimmy Buffett tributes on the first day. Actually, so this is my 7th Jazz Fest, and this was probably the best one that my wife and I have been to, including ones that I went to when I was at Tulane. I saw people that I've never heard of before. A lot of the undercards are really where it's at with these festivals. This guy, Sema Funk, who I've never heard of before. This guy was the Cuban James Brown. He basically made love to the entire crowd, and it was nothing short of magical, and it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. So
That's
highly
awesome.
recommend checking out the undercards. But Rolling Stones tomorrow, excuse my language, is going to be an absolute shit show. I don't know how people are going to not get trampled, but that's not my problem, I suppose.
It's going to be Altamont again. Well, let's save the we can save the music talk for the second half.
Yeah. So Justin, thank you so much for your time. Moish and I had the pleasure of reading your book, The Crypto Legal Handbook. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about how you started to go about writing this book? What was the impetus? What was it like writing the book while having a full-time job and familial obligations and all those kinds of things?
Yeah, appreciate it. Essentially, I get reached out to, and I'm sure you guys do as well, like all the time by young lawyers or law students who are interested in crypto or in the field, or even people who are not lawyers who are just like wanting to learn more about the industry. And they would ask me, what can I do to learn more? What can I do to break in? Things like this. And my initial response was like, start like playing around with the technology, like kind of send transactions, see if there's, you think there's anything to all this. Follow, a bunch of accounts on Twitter, you know, keep up with all the news that's moving from day to day. And then I would like kind of create like a list of what eventually became like almost 100 links to articles and blog posts and YouTube videos and podcasts. And I said, oh, okay, if you read all of this and like listen to all these videos and podcasts, you should have a pretty good sense. And like the feedback I got from like almost every person who I sent that to was that they just didn't look at any of it. And it was just too much. It was intimidating. Yeah. Even people who I would like onboard to like work for me, they didn't even want to like start clicking on all these links and just like listening to different podcasts. So what I started to do, because I was getting these questions so much, is I started writing an article. And originally it was going to be just like a LinkedIn post, and then it kind of like expanded to like maybe it'll be like a 5 or 10 page article, putting into like context and categorizing all of these different resources. So if someone said, where can I start? I could send this to them. And they could say, okay, to learn more about securities, I can like look at these, and here are the cases I should read. And to learn more about like compliance, here's what I should read. To learn more about the history of some of these projects, here's what I should read or like listen to. And that just kind of expanded and expanded. And at some point it was like a 25-page article. And I just said like, it'll actually be easier for me to just like expand this out to like a book. And then at least I can like, guide the person through like my thoughts on, the history of crypto, on like what you need to know about the technology, about the different areas of law. And before I knew it, I was just spending my free time writing a book. To answer your question, like how do you balance like a very like ridiculously full-time job with like a project of this magnitude? And here's the honest trick is you just commit to ruining a very small portion of every day for a consistently long amount of time. And if you write, it took me about a year to write, and it's about 250 pages long. So it's not so hard to, write an average of like half a page a day or 3/4 of a page a day.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that approach, the sort of piecemeal attack, death by a thousand cuts, as it were. Um, how did you go about compiling the information? Was it solely from your work experience, from research, other external sources? What was the main way in which you did that? Because it's really informative and thorough. It's really excellent.
It's going to sound crazy, but like there was very little like research that I needed to do. Like it was just kind of all in my head. So what I would kind of do is I'd say like, all right, today I'm going to write the Department of Treasury, right, section. And I would sit down and I would just kind of like outline, okay, here are the things that I think need to be addressed. And I just start to write it. And then as I would like refine, and if you want, I can get into like, I have like a kind of a bizarre writing and editing process. But what I would do is as I would keep refining, I would start to like, okay, let me look at this case. Let me start to like pull different resources and things like that. So it came very naturally, and a lot of it was just like already stuck in my head, and I just needed to get it out. But so so weird. Like I saw this documentary about J.R.R. Tolkien, like I don't know, 15, 20 years
Yeah,
ago.
Lord of the Rings, right there. There you go.
Yeah,
Nice.
you're a big nerd. So I
I love it.
yeah, so
You nailed it in 5 minutes. Yeah.
so they talked about his writing process, and basically what he would do is he would sit down and he would write chapter one. And then what he would do is when he got to chapter two, he would rewrite chapter one and then write chapter two. And then he
Mm,
would rewrite chapter one and two before he got to three. And I kind of did the same thing where I would write something and then I would write the next section. And then before I would get to the third section, I would go back to the first and I would try to like create ties and references that go back and forth. So a lot of the like footnotes and sort of resources that are drawn in, and some of the like references to like future chapters were just done through that process. And I think as a result, it feels like a narrative, and it feels like someone guiding you through in a
mhm.
way that maybe appears more planned out than was the reality of it.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that really spoke to me as what I think is, the youngest crypto person on this video right now is that when I started taking my journey, I really dove down the rabbit hole hard and became real degen, aping into everything, buying all kinds of things irresponsibly so. But it gave me a fundamental understanding of how these ecosystems work, how these projects work, what they mean, what's good, what doesn't, what's good, what's bad, what does, and so on and so forth. And in this book, you talk about it a few times about how in order to represent people, in order to be an attorney in this space, in order to be a service professional, you need to understand it. And I'm sure you've seen it. There are so many practitioners out there who are crypto lawyers, but they don't know anything about crypto, or they scoff at it, or they think it's a scam. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a different category that like upsets me even more, which is this like elderly financial regulatory attorney who believes that he's adopted this like sort of like folksy identity. It's like, oh, I'm just too old to know about technology. But it's like, we're paying you $2,000 an hour to like figure out about the technology.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, look, there, there's a lot of, there are many examples that I have in my head, and I won't, I won't list them because you'll be able to figure out who I'm talking about, of, you know, public proceedings where the judge or the regulator may have said, why would someone use this currency? How does this work? And then the answer is, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not a crypto guy, right? And it's a missed opportunity. And my view on it is, if our advocates can't take the industry seriously and understand not only the mechanics but also like the philosophy behind decentralized technologies, then you're never going to be able to like um, convince a regulator or a court what the perspective is. Um, so yeah, I do think that like if you want to be like an actual crypto lawyer, it's probably helpful for you to understand the technology. You don't need to be like a computer scientist. You don't need to know how to code. You probably don't need to like ape into all sorts of meme coins and be like reckless with your own finances. But it helps for you to understand like the practicalities of like these technologies, and
Sure.
understand also like where this is all going, because a big part of like any type of regulation or any sort of court decision is not just like, well, what is happening right now, but what is the effect that this is going to have on the industry in the future. And I just don't see how you can understand and appreciate where things are going if you just take no interest at all in where things are.
Right. We sure do know a lot of them, right, Moish?
Yeah, no, I
And
mean, look, Kyle and I were reading the book and talking about it in preparation of this. We're like, yeah, exactly what you said. You know, onboarding Kyle, onboarding other associates, onboarding, you know, interns and law clerks. It's how do you get them to download all this information? And so, you know, one of the ways you can do is you can hire for people that already have some of that and have expressed interest and you know, have some of the legal background, but also have some of the technical interest. But there's still so much for, you know, for even experienced attorneys to potentially learn. So I guess, you know, now this book is here, the next, you know, intern comes along. Um, you know, now that there's beginning to be more resources like this book, where should someone like that start?
yeah, I mean, to me, like the reason I wrote this is I wanted to write it for like kind of two separate audiences. One was like law students and lawyers who wanted to learn more about this. And, you know, if you guys read it, it starts off assuming you know nothing about Bitcoin. You've never heard of Bitcoin, let alone all the, you know, DeFi and DAOs and NFTs and everything that like might, you know, stem from there. And then it also assumes that you like don't know the first thing about what the Department of Treasury does. You don't know the first thing about money transmission. You don't know the first thing about securities. So it's really meant to be like an accessible guide for like lawyers, but also I think as importantly, like an accessible guide for people who need to eventually hire lawyers. And this is like the, I guess the flip side of like the lawyer who doesn't give a shit about crypto are the entrepreneurs who sometimes like just don't have any interest in like learning about the regulations and they just put all their trust in these lawyers. So you have like two different sets of people operating with like half information and sometimes like it just doesn't it doesn't jive. So hopefully like people will appreciate that it really is like a primer and it really is tried to be like as accessible as possible.
Yeah, I think, I mean, congrats on that. I think you really achieved that. And I think if we were to have the ability and time to write this book, which maybe none of us had, this is certainly the kind of book that, we would have written. So, you know, hats off to you for getting it done and publishing it. And it seems like it's already, you know, taken on a bit of success. So I hope that continues.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because like it came out about a little over a week ago. And it's been, you know, people have like been very positive about it, but like no one like people bought it because like they followed me on LinkedIn or like they heard it like on like the internet. But now people have like finally like gone through it a bit, so I'm getting like good feedback and people have been like really positive. So it's been nice. It's rare that things that things are a pleasant surprise.
In terms of, you know, if I can ask a more specific question about just regulation in general, you know, where do you think the the United States is headed? Without getting into specifics, just what do you think is a better paradigm for us as practitioners to think about? Do we want, you know, overarching legislation to come out? Do we want to have more of a self-contained, you know, self-regulation, you know, type of ecosystem like what Hong Kong is proposing? What are your thoughts on what the next 5 years are going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think like a self-regulatory agency or organization is like practical in in the US for something like this. So, you know, there's really two paths, right? The first is you kind of leave it as it is right now, which is like every state sort of regulates it in one way or the other. Or you pick a federal regulator and you say, okay, you're tasked with it, and you kind of like get away from like the semantics of, you know, is this a security? Is this a commodity? Where is the line? And you just say everything that is a digital asset is sort of like regulated by this agency. And I, you know, I really don't know. I really don't know what's the best long term. I think they both have their advantages and disadvantages. From my
Sure.
perspective, though, um, you just have to pick a route, right? And give clarity. And I think what'll happen, you see this in like a lot of industries, is, you know, absent regulation that is like specifically designed to kill the industry it's regulating, but like, just like kind of reasonable regulations. Um, the broader crypto industry will figure out a way to comply with it and will be successful. But it's the uncertainty of it all that I think
Right.
is, causing everyone to have a lot of frustration.
Right. Well, fortunately, we're in an election year, and so for sure we're going to have some clarity within the next 6 months.
You have more faith than I do in this election.
I don't have a lot of faith, no matter what
Yeah.
happens, quite frankly.
I'm curious why you think. I mean, without getting into specifics, I think there's certain activities which are more obviously activities that maybe could or should be regulated.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a lot of activities that perhaps, I mean, getting away from um, just centralized, like there could be more decentralized things that are perhaps less financially motivated that could get into a more self-regulated, especially I'm thinking about like NFTs and IP and domains and things like that people aren't really talking about in the maybe mainstream regulatory sphere. Why do you think there hasn't been any interest in perhaps a self-regulatory or sort of like regulation by consensus type approach that has come up in other tech industries like prior to crypto?
I think um, there's been ideas of like how do we self-regulate, and even if you look at something like Coinbase's TRUST, right, which is like the travel rule, like that's somewhat of a self-regulatory, but they're always like optional. When Kyle was talking about like a self-regulatory organization, I thought he was talking about something like FINRA, which is like it's self-regulatory by basically regulation, like it's mandatory. Um, I think that there are like best practices that are going to continue to develop. The idea of the broader DeFi ecosystem just agreeing to a set of standards is in some ways like antithetical to DeFi, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know what that would look like. Now, what it might end up looking like, and I've not like thought through this, but like in the same way we have like technical standards, right? Like, you have like ERC20 tokens, right? Like maybe there will be some sort of like compliance type of, standard that's like, you know, built in at like a protocol level. But I haven't seen any proposals for that, and I don't know how that would even necessarily work out. I know that like Rebecca Reddick has like proposed like the idea of like
Right.
DeFi compliance, and um, you know, I think like these are all like really interesting topics that are still being explored, but I don't know of any that are like going to be able to be implemented in the near
Sure.
future. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think near future is the yeah. And that's interesting. One of the things that made me think of was an example of like self-regulatory. Like what I was thinking, and I've had conversations along these lines, are the way that internet domains are self-regulated, and those are done through ICANN, which is a basically opt-in contractual regime where every registrar agrees to. So I could see how that philosophy could potentially be consistent with DeFi, at least for some types of use cases. But we're probably 5 or 10 years away from any sort of serious uh, consideration of something like that. I would imagine.
I imagine that like how seriously the like decentralized like finance and like kind of DAO side of the industry takes that is going to depend on um, sort of like how the case law presents itself with regard to basically if you are creating a technology that allows people to engage in activity that had it been centralized would be regulated and you have liability for that activity, that might create like a bit of a movement. But I think right now, for the most part, like the DeFi space is still of the position that if you just create the code, that doesn't constitute activity. Um, and
Right. Yeah.
there's like it's a really interesting question that's eventually it's going to need to be like decided by like the courts, because you have cases, like the Bernstein case is like one where it says, okay, if you're creating code and that's it. It's just source code that's protected by the First Amendment. And then you have like these like computational speech cases and the Grokster case at the Supreme Court on the other side, which says, well, actually, if you're creating code and that code is, you know, somehow usable for activity, then maybe there's like liability in certain contexts. So where that line is with respect to like financial activity, I think is still sort of up to the, you know, up for debate and kind of, you know, the fodder of law reviews at this point.
And then you have the added issue of, you know, courts are going to come down in different ways with respect to these different cases in different jurisdictions. You have state courts and federal courts, and it's just so, you know, spread out here in the US that you could have, you know, two similar cases brought into different jurisdictions and have completely disparate results sometimes. And then what? So it flies right in the face of the idea of a consensus.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I think there's an argument to be said that like that's a feature, not a bug,
Yeah.
right? Like there, it's, you know, it's a scarier country if there's just like a court of first appeal, whatever it is, right? Where like once you get like some judge in Louisiana to decide something, that's going to be the law until a discretionary court decides not to. Like it, you know, there's it can be sometimes be helpful that you have like a slower process, but you
Hmm.
know, there's lots of examples where you have like permanent circuit splits and the Supreme Court's not interested in resolving them.
Right. Yeah. And then, you know, hearkening back to what you were talking about before, you know, a lot of times the people who are adjudicating these cases aren't familiar with the assets. They don't know about them, and or the people on their staff don't know about them. It just adds an extra wrinkle to how are these people deciding the fate of these assets if they don't really understand the fundamental nature of what these assets really are. It's really
Or
a quagmire.
yeah, or even like what is the point in the first place, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think I think the reason to learn about and to use the technology and to kind of like be invested, not like in a monetary sense, but like just be like interested in where all this is like occasionally you do have to explain this to someone who is not familiar with these concepts that we think about every day.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know if you've ever like taught before, but like the way you learn a subject is you teach it, right?
Absolutely.
I learned a lot about crypto just having to put all of my thoughts together for this book. And as a result, you know, you're able to explain things in a way that, you know, you can use analogies, you can use, you know, you can simplify concepts, you can talk about ideals rather than like specifics in order to like explain what the purpose of all this is. And this is the problem with like a lot of the lawyers who end up getting hired um, to represent the industry is that, you know, they take this position of like I'm a litigator, I'm a regulatory attorney. Anything that's in front of me, I can figure out because I'm like I have like kind of like a generalist practice. But at the end of the day, if you ask them like, okay, well, how does self custody actually work? They have no idea.
Right. Yeah.
What does self custody mean? Well, they have no idea. Okay, well, how are you supposed to explain that like control is not present for, you know, um, unlicensed money transmission claim if you don't really understand what control is in like a completely digital sense, right? And like I remember like I had this issue like early in my career, like I don't know, 2015 maybe 2016, where a person came to me. They were told by another firm that their non-custodial wallet basically was a money transmitter and needed licenses in 48 states, and the lawyer didn't know what a non-custodial wallet is. He just assumed
Uh,
wallet custody, and he said, okay, it'll cost you $1 million and take you like 4 years to possibly get this. So what does that mean for the client? It means that your lawyer's advice is basically go out of business, right? Because
uh,
how could you do it? So the person came to me and said, all right, let me explain to you what, a wallet is. And I was like, no, I get it. Like, you don't have custody. You don't hold the private keys. There's no, there's no custody, control there. And that's really helpful at sort of like the end of the day. And we're 15 years into this experiment, and there are still lawyers out there who just are like, well, I'm not a crypto person. And it's like, all right, well,
right. Yeah.
the good thing
Although
the good thing that's happening is that like people who are like knowledgeable and like really good lawyers have now sort of like aged in to like, kind of a senior position at a lot of these firms. So whereas it used to be entirely like when I first started, when I first started representing crypto companies, I was a second year lawyer. And what I would do is I would like
Huh.
quarterback like my friends' cases to like the senior, like, financial regulators, regulatory attorneys, and just like kind of translate between the two. But I had no authority to like give any advice, right? I was like
Right.
I was on a short leash, and I was just basically taking hands. But over a long enough period of time, you end up developing your own book and kind of breaking out the practice, and
Sure.
then you do. So you're actually starting to see like some very very good law firms that have like, I would say, like ultra high end like crypto knowledge.
Yeah, it's interesting how that's developed, and I think you said somewhere along the lines of you have to kind of know a baseline of like everything and be a generalist of everything, but then specialize in very narrow areas. And um, I think that's from my perspective, that seems like the right way to approach that. So I mean, how would you suggest someone that is that second year attorney now that maybe is trying to learn the ropes at a firm, and this is something I have this conversation a lot, I'm sure you do too. How do you balance specialization with generalization? Where should you emphasize learning to the extent you have agency in that?
Yeah, I sort of took the position early on that I wanted to be able to address any type of question that came through my door from like the entire industry. So, you know, it's like I wanted to learn enough to be dangerous, and then I know where to go if I need like something like hyper technical, right? So if someone I'm not an IP lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but like if someone came to me with like most IP issues, I could like, you know, I have a pretty good sense of like where the law is, and then I also have like a good Rolodex or whatever the equivalent is now of like
Yep.
people I can call to get like specific help. And that's also helpful because like I also know enough that if like an IP lawyer is telling me something that doesn't like feel right to me, I know enough to really challenge. And I mean, you guys know this, like for a lot of lawyers, like they'll tell you something, and then if you push back, the answer changes very very quickly.
Yeah.
So having like a broad kind of set of skills is important. I would say the most important thing, and like the absolute like best thing that ever happened to me in my career was like I landed at like the right firm with the right mentor, and I had someone who really like saw that there was like something happening in this space, and I like seemed to have my pulse on it, and kind of gave me protection within the firm to like explore this interest. Um, and then also part of it is like you got to kind of take a risk with your career at some point. Like early on, you got to imagine like I'm a first year lawyer at a mid to large size law firm, and I'm turning down work because I wasn't interested in it. And I was like, I don't want to do this bankruptcy work. I don't want to do this insurance work. And I was like, at the time when I got hired, I was like, I'm only doing First Amendment work. And this is before like, there was
Ah.
any such thing as a crypto. So I was
Yeah.
hired by a guy who was doing like exclusively like First Amendment constitutional litigation. That was all I was interested in. I was turning down, basically all other work. And I was just kind of trying to fill my time with other things that interested me. And my perspective early on in my career was, the worst thing that they can do is fire me. And, the worst thing that could happen to me is that all of a sudden I get stuck doing bankruptcy, you know, like foreclosure cases or something like that. And then I'm 10 years into it and I'm doing PIP work or something like that. And I hate my career. So you do, I think it's super risky, and it worked out for me. But I remember like there were a lot of people at my former firm who kind of like were saying, you really got to be careful. Like you sure
Yeah.
you sure this is the reputation you want? And it's you got to take a risk with your career at some point.
It's a really interesting and really good advice, I think, for young lawyers. One to take risks, but also it's similar along the lines of what you're saying. It's, I've been doing this almost 20 years, and I know a lot about, M&A and securities transactions. And just by virtue of doing it, I know enough about tax to answer some basic questions, but I know enough not to commit malpractice. So if the question comes up and I don't know, it's actually okay to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. And I think a lot of lawyers, young lawyers in particular, they're terrified of those words. They think that if you say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, let me get back to you, they'll lose the client. And, it's just very slippery slope, but also along the lines of what you're saying. I've been doing this so long. If I have to read another operating agreement, I might set myself on fire. It's really wonderful to have a
Well,
new.
so like I was doing all this like First Amendment work, and I had quite a bit of work to do in that area. And then I started to have like friends of mine who were starting crypto companies.
Mhm.
So I would bring them in, and I mean, you got to imagine like this 2013, late 2013, early 2014. Like it wasn't like sophisticated operations, right? These are like people are starting a business. They need like general business, sort of advice in a lot of cases. So what I would do is I would sort of basically just like volunteer to take on, contractual drafting assignments. I would like want to learn, okay, like how does a cap table work? How does like fundraising work and things like that? And I would really try to like in my like free time, this is before I had any kids. In my free time, I would really try to like say like, okay, I don't know any, like someone came in and they wanted, they needed like a private placement memorandum. I don't know how to
Now you're
do that.
talking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know how to do that. What do I need? And then you start to like expand your knowledge from these experiences.
sure.
It was surprising to me because the firm was like very like they let me do this, and they were like supportive in a lot of ways because I was like bringing in a bit of business. But it surprises me, like sometimes I'll meet lawyers and they'll be like, I'm a 33 Act attorney. I don't know anything about the 34 Act. I was like, it's right there, right?
That's
Or like
crazy. It's
or
insanity.
like you'll go to some, this
So
used to
ridiculous.
happen all the time in like the early days, which is you would go to someone and they were a securities lawyer, and they would say, okay, here's the advice from a securities perspective, and you read their advice and you realize like, oh, you're completely stepping in it in like 50 different states, or whatever it was, 48 states, with
Right.
like on
Yeah.
the money transmission side. So you're basically just like trading in one set of issues for another sometimes. And my view is like, the best thing that I could do is like learn as much as I can about the business. So, I can sit on, I can figure out what needs to happen and where, and that if I press on this side, it's not going to, push something on this side over.
Right.
Yeah, I think that holistic approach is great, and I think that's also a reminder to us and the other perhaps more senior attorneys out there that our ethos is certainly to create the firm that we want to work at, right? But to create those pathways for those junior attorneys to be entrepreneurial, to allow
Yeah.
them to get their work done, but in those gaps to find those opportunities where we're Kyle and I are thinking about those. So it's hard to also allow that, but it sounds like you had a great mentor and a great firm that enabled that.
Yeah. No,
And certainly I think Kyle and I feel the same way that, there wasn't a digital asset group here, 4 years ago, and now there is, right? So um,
so so
it's,
much
it's, it's,
about
it,
so much about everything is just luck and timing and being around the right
yeah,
people, right? So I think that's like a big part of like where I am. It's just I honestly, like, I really try to tell people like, take seriously the place that you get your first job, right? and
Yeah.
and like to me, like it was just like the luck of my life that I like, um I met this partner. He offered me like a job at the lunch, like our first lunch meeting, and he became like, as close as a father to me for like several years. He passed away in
Yeah.
2020, but like
Mm.
he just took me under his wing, and he was like one of these guys who was like at like the later end of his career, and he didn't have anything else to prove. He had already made, he made the money, and he just like enjoyed bringing up people in the law, and he like spent a lot of time training me in like constitutional like brief writing and things like that. And you know he really wanted the best, and there were other firms that I could have gone to that were probably paid me more or more prestigious, or there were all sorts of reasons, but like people matter at some point, and you can't just say like, oh, okay, what's the best school to go to? Whatever's the highest rank on the top 14 I get into. What's the best firm to get to? Well, whatever's the highest rank on the AmLaw 100. It's like,
Yeah.
no, that's not the way to do it.
Right. What's the best crypto law school? It's like, yeah.
God.
The best crypto law school is the one that has the best weather and will give you the best tuition.
Oh, the best
Man,
weather. Yeah. Now you're
from
talking.
a UM law to a UF law grad, it's like,
Yeah.
That's right.
There's not too bad in Tulane.
Yeah, that's true.
The other thing that I always stress, and like I have like a healthy disrespect for authority, I guess, and I never like believe that like the person who like, there's always like a couple guys at every law firm who like wear a bow tie and they think that they're like John Houseman in the Paper Chase, and like, oh, the law is this mystery, and you really, it's like, it's like almost nothing that any of us do is beyond comprehension of anyone with like a basic like reading comprehension.
Right.
And like being able to have the attitude of like, okay, yeah, I can learn securities law, I can learn mergers, I can learn tax, I can learn all of these things, and I don't need 15 years of each to like be competent enough to like talk about it. I think that was like something that I maybe I overestimated when I was like really young, and now I realize like a lot of it is actually like somewhat it's kind of difficult to like really get like a good foundation. But I do really believe that like you can learn more than one thing, and you probably should.
Outside of the SEC, CFTC, financial regulatory space, in writing this book or researching the book, or where do you think are the most interesting legal issues that maybe haven't been addressed in the mainstream, perhaps maybe didn't even make the cutting board for the book? Like where do you think, if I'm an enterprising young attorney, I'm not an SEC person, I'm not a CFTC, like where would you spend some energy?
Entirely on the constitutional issues is like where I fall. Like there's absolutely nothing in this book for the most part about the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. It's touched on a little bit in like sort of like the privacy section, but I wrote an article several years ago about like the First Amendment implications of Bitcoin, called Bitcoin as Speech. And like to me, like that's the most like intellectually interesting areas. And like this idea, I kind of call it like pragmatic constitutionalism, which is like a phrase that like I mean, it's not like, I just made it up, but like but it's like this idea that like if you have fundamental rights and those fundamental rights can be taken away by a 5-4 decision, then they're not fundamental rights, right? So this idea that like, okay, there are First Amendment or Fourth Amendment or Fifth Amendment protections for all of these different types of associational or expressive activities, that's only as true as you can get advocates to craft convincing enough like policy arguments to courts to demonstrate that it's actually towards our like better nature, that we should be protecting them. And this like goes back to the idea that you want your lawyers to really understand not only the technology but like the philosophy behind a lot of this, like the world of crypto. And we're seeing that play out in like the Samurai and like the Tornado Cash cases,
Yep.
right? You're seeing that play
for sure.
Yeah, there are other
Even like major questions, doctrine, things like that, right?
Yeah. So to me, like I was like a law nerd, and like my first love was like kind of like these like writing like long briefs and kind of thinking about those things. So like to me, like if I were to say like what's the area that's most interesting, it would be like sort of how do your rights impact with technology. Beyond that, I think like it's mostly like financial regulations is where it gets really interesting, and everything else is just like business law, corporate law, right, patent law, and there's going to be some like interaction. But there was a guy who I knew, and he was like a lawyer in the 90s, and he had I saw he had a business card he showed me from the 90s, and it was like his name, and it said like internet lawyer, and it's like he was an internet lawyer. And I and now you would never call yourself an internet lawyer because like the internet is everything. And I kind of take the position of like right now, like I'm a crypto lawyer and you guys are crypto lawyers, and if all goes well, it'll be a little cringe to like say that you're a crypto lawyer in 15 years because well, crypto's just it's like saying you're a money lawyer. What does that mean? No,
Right.
you're a network lawyer. It all kind of integrates itself into like the broader definition of like internet and technology.
Mm-hmm. That's a
I do know a
yeah.
bunch of people that are still like internet lawyers. So
They probably they all have their bow ties.
And they wear the bow tie, right? Exactly. I mean, that's a question I get all the time. It's like, you're a crypto lawyer. What does that mean? How do you advise on crypto? And it's like, well, these people come to us still to this day. It's like, oh, well, me and my partners, have this thing that we're doing. It's like, oh, cool. What kind of entity do you have? Huh? What? Do you have a partnership agreement? No. Why would we have that? And it's like, well, okay, you have a business. You have another better mousetrap, basically just for the same thing.
Have you guys ever been in house?
I have not.
Have you, Moish?
I've interned and worked in legal departments, but not since graduating law school.
One of the reasons, like, go in house, like at some point in your career, right? Go in house and just like experience that. But like, here's the reason why I think like my life is better in house than as an outside counsel. It's that two reasons. One is I recall like even like very early on, people would come to me and they would say, okay, this is a project, this is the business I want to create, whatever. And it was frustrating for me to know more about the person's business than they did.
Yeah.
Right. And being in house is this idea like you can take like long-term ownership of a project and you're, the other thing about it, which I think is like, it's just really satisfying for at least a part of your life, is that like, let's say I go to you and I go, Moish, I have a real big problem. You're the expert at this. Here's my issue. If you can fix this, you're going to save my company $1 million, $10 million. And then you go, okay, I got to drop everything. You're working over like the weekends. You're up late at night. You save the day and you go and you take your answer and you give it to me. And I go, hey guys, look what I did. I just saw this huge problem. And I go, Moish, thank you so much. Here's your hourly rate and you get paid. And then, my stock options get better, right? I have like this I have this long-term pride. And I was going really frustrated when I was at as outside counsel, that it was never really my victory. And I never really felt like I was part of that team, even though like I was friends with these people, everyone was really happy. Everyone had a really good working relationship, but there's always that disconnect, which is, okay, in order for me to like go and talk to you, the problem has to rise to the level of outside counsel, right? Rates. And what you don't realize is like the types of issues that just kind of like bubble up on like a daily basis that never get talked to by outside counsel because you just kind of figure it out internally. And that to me is like where like that's where the special sauce is realizing all of the non-existential issues that occur for a company that you just need to like juggle and deal with. That's where like a lot of the fun is.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I definitely get that and see that in both directions. And yeah, you save the company email that's like, it takes you 12 minutes to write, but it generates, $1 million in surplus value. And great. I mean, that's what one of my partners would say, like, that's the life we chose kind of thing.
There's another aspect to it that like has like made my life a lot better, which is, when I would meet someone as outside counsel, right? I would meet you like a super interesting person at a conference or, whatever. And we'd connect and we'd be talking about like what they were working on, things are vibing, right? And in the back of my mind, I had to always have like, oh, I wonder if this person can become a client and pay me more than $1,000 an hour to talk to me. And there's this like natural like transactional mentality that develops in your interactions.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
well, I think that speaks to,
yeah.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but like a larger question, which, I don't know if some idealistic crypto dude is going to solve, which is, and I've been having this conversation, quite often, which is the way that law firms get paid and the dependency on the hourly rate and the dissatisfaction, I think largely that a lot of clients and a lot of probably more law firms than clients have with most of the alternative fee structures. And that the reality is for most clients, for most matters, most of the time, the hourly rate just makes more sense. And whether, I don't know if it's necessarily crypto that's going to solve that, but certainly entrepreneurial people working in a new industry, thinking about like public good funding, and like there has to be a way to crack that egg. And I don't know if you spent much time thinking about that.
No, I mean not really. I mean the incentive structures at large, especially large law firms, are perverse. So, for example, let's say me and Kyle are first year lawyers at a big law firm, and let's say that Kyle is brilliant. He's the best associate to ever like join this firm, and I am just like a complete putz, right? Kyle is being tasked with, writing Supreme Court briefs. He's doing really haughty research, right? That's taxing sort of work. You can only you can only do so much of it during a day. At the end of the year, he bills, let's say has a really good year, he bills 1,650 hours doing the most complicated research ever. And me, they don't trust me with anything, and they stick me in a warehouse doing doc review, and I bill 2,300 hours doing doc review. And guess what? I'm going to become partner, and I'm going to get a giant bonus, and Kyle's going to be exited out of the firm.
Exactly.
So
That's exactly right.
Slacker
Yeah,
Kyle.
nailed it.
right.
Yeah.
So
True.
here's the real problem is that, like, what is Kyle to do? He only has two options. He could either like continue to fail at his career, or sometimes that hour-long paper that he wrote, well, maybe it took an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the 1,600 hours sometimes becomes 2,200 hours. And, you'd be surprised how many times in a law firm you see someone kind of padding their hours, and, oh, maybe they have like an anniversary dinner, and, they can't work 8 hours today. But if they don't work 8 hours today, they have to make up for it at some point, because every 2 weeks, your law firm's like a team manager or whatever will tell you, hey, you're kind of slacking on these hours. So
Yeah.
it creates a really, like, I think, unethical incentive structure. That being said, like, flat rates sound great, but the flat rates are designed such that one side is winning or the other side is winning. So I don't know what for a lot of areas of law, you don't necessarily need it's hard to predict, like litigation.
Right.
It's like almost impossible to predict, but occasionally, like, you have something like this used to happen with like money transmission surveys, right? Where a firm would put together a 50-state survey for money transmission, and that was basically their internal sort of like cheat sheet. And then you go to them and they go, hey, you know what you need? You need a money transmission survey, $40,000. And what are they doing? They're just kind of taking that and kind of putting it into a different form, and they're charging you a flat rate. You think, oh, great, it's at least it's predictable. But in reality, it's not necessarily lined up at the time.
No.
There was a story. So I was in this First Amendment group, and there was this old timer who used to represent the Miami Herald, and he just knew everyone. He's like, he king of Miami sort of guy. So one of the folks from the Herald went to him and said, this all happened like years before. I'm not like telling like client secrets. This happened in like, I think, the 60s. So like, this wasn't my client. This is like one of these like lore stories that were told at the firm. So, editor of the Herald or something like comes to him and says, one of my reporters wouldn't give up a source. They threw him in jail. We need to go and we need to file like an emergency, TRO. We need to throw everything on this. What's it going to cost? And the guy said, I can get the guy out of jail for, I forget the number, $10,000, right? $20,000, whatever it is, $20,000. And he goes, okay, do whatever you need to do. An hour later, he calls him up. He goes, all right, he's being released. And he goes, what? What did you do? What did you file? He's like, I called my friend, the judge, and I told him that, I didn't want to have to file all these papers. Let him out. And he got let out. And he goes, okay, well, I'm not paying you $20,000 for that. And he goes, well, why? We agreed on the price. He goes, it took an hour of your time. And he said, well, it took me 35 years to know who to call.
Yeah. Political
right?
capital.
And
Yeah.
you're paying for the 35 years. So
Oh yeah.
maybe there's something to that.
Nah, it's a
It's
great
great.
point, and just to add a slight wrinkle to that, in addition to the juxtaposition of the hourly model creates perverse incentives, fixed fees create a situation where it's the client says just one more question, and that turns into 30,000 questions. The other thing is that it's sometimes difficult to quantify exactly what it is, which is a perfect example of your story. This pen costs 50 cents to make. I sell it for $1. People can understand that. If it's, I need this project done, how much does it cost? It's like, well, I don't know. It depends. And people really have a difficult time wrapping their head around it. So it's a really, it's a difficult business model to navigate, even for us veterans who've been doing it for a long time. So
This is why I think there's like a pretty amazing opportunity, even for people just starting now in crypto, because like I do believe that like the people I know who are the best crypto lawyers, they just know all of the cases that have occurred. They know all the news cycles that have occurred.
yeah,
Right? Why? Because they've just seen it in front of them. Like it's just okay. Like for me, like one of the reasons I wanted to write this is because like I was thinking to myself like if I were just graduating and I wanted to get into crypto, like I just wouldn't know where to start. There's just so much, and I just had the benefit of like just being there and being like, oh yeah, okay, I know who that is. I remember when that happened, and you get to like, you know, so like when someone comes, if so doesn't happen now, but like at outside counsel, if someone would come to me and they would say, I wanna do like a prediction market. Can I do that? I wouldn't have to go and say like, oh, let me research prediction markets and crypto. I I know the case. Like no, that's
right.
already like I know exactly where to look, and I'll see if like anything else happened that I didn't find. But like it's just sort of like top of mind because I got to experience it, right? Like um, it's almost like a biographical narrative because I've been living it, and I think it's so important for people coming up to like really try to appreciate like the history and understanding like how we got here, how the case law developed, sort of like I think even like the personalities involved in a lot of these discussions are representative of like what the industry was and where it is now. Like if you look at like who were the most popular voices in 2014 versus who are the most popular voices now, you can kind of tell like how the character of the industry and its sort of priorities have changed. And you know, I think there are a lot of places to learn about securities. There are a lot of places to learn about like commodities. There's not a lot of places I think to just like understand like in a little package like how did we get here from like a lawyer's perspective, and that's where I think this like book maybe has a benefit.
Yeah, that and we need a compendium of the main character of the week for the last like 10 years.
Yeah.
That's definitely true. Well, Justin, you've been extremely gracious with your time. We really, I've loved chatting with you. But before we let you go, what's coming up next? You have another book that you're kicking around upstairs, or what's coming up next for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've always like been a writer, so I've always have like I've always been in like the middle of like different projects, and here's the thing: is once you like get the book and you see it and you get like a positive reaction, you forget how awful it was to write, and you forget like how much time you spent away from your family. So I'm being cautious before jumping into a project, and I also promised like my wife who's pregnant that I wouldn't like abandon her like to just spend my nights at Starbucks writing again. But I think if I were to put the next thing together, I think it's going to be like a fiction, like kind of a fiction book, like
Oh,
John
cool.
Grisham style sort of fiction book in the world of like crypto forensics.
Oh, that sounds
Oh,
that
Like
sounds
think about
great.
like think about like the Da Vinci Code and
yeah,
meets the firm meets like the Crypto Legal Handbook.
yeah. Have you read Tracers in the Dark? Like the
No, I don't know.
there's there's a few that's it's nonfiction, but it's the story of like the Silk Road investigative team and
Oh, yeah, yeah,
um
yeah. I think I've seen the person who wrote it on a
yeah, John, I think
podcast.
it's Green. I have it here actually. I'll drop it in the show notes. I'll send an email afterwards. But
Yeah, yeah, that's cool.
there's some actually really good nonfiction. And if you go to there's some like tracing events I can bring you to. You can probably interview some of the people that are involved in those cases if you don't already know them.
I'm like a huge proponent of like engaging in like frivolous activities, like frivolous like
it's fantastic.
art projects and music projects and things like that. So the last year has been spent working on like what I would say is like a pretty serious like in that like the book takes itself seriously, but I think like I need to like let loose a bit and start to play around a little more.
Well, congratulations
on
Thank you.
It's really wonderful.
To you and your wife. And I understand that you'll be providing some updates over time on your website. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah. I mean, not to bore you, but if I may go on like a slight rant about like the state of crypto textbooks.
Please do.
Okay, so they cost so much money. They're like $300 or $400 sometimes to these like kids that are like captive in class. And the problem is that they all go through like the same, like, let's say 3 or 4 publishers. And they're either one of two styles, right? They're like an actual textbook, and they're so big and dense to justify their price that they go, they use them for 3 or 4 years. So, I mean, imagine using like a textbook from 2019 right now. Like it doesn't help you at all. Arguably, my book, which came out a week ago, should be updated by this point. So the idea,
right?
It's impossible to keep up. You can't keep up with everything all the time.
It's not. So here's where I feel like I really cracked the code. Okay, so I decided not to do. I didn't want to go through a publisher, right? I've had a lot of like bad experiences with publishers before, mostly trying to like exert like a ridiculously long timeline on what I think is a finished product, right? So this is self-published, and what that means is like through Amazon KDP, which is print-on-demand books, right? So when you buy a book, Amazon prints it and then sends it to you. If I wanted to, I could update the manuscript tonight, upload it by Friday evening. If you buy it, you'll get the uploaded version. There's like a 48 or 72 hour like basically window. So my idea is when something like Blockbuster happens, no matter what it is, right? The Coinbase decision comes out tomorrow. I'm updating it as soon as that comes out. So whoever picks it up gets that update. And in the interim, there's all these like kind of like little things that occur. I did two things. One is I created a newsletter, which every week I'll just send you, here are like the 5 or 6 things that happen that I think like you should probably just be aware of, and here are the links. And then I put all of the footnotes to the website on the cryptolegalhandbook.com/resources. And as like interim updates occur, where the footnote for that activity is, I'm just going to put in like red, here's the new update. So that way, even if you're reading this and you're like, okay, what happened to like the Mango Markets right case? Well, Mango Markets, like his being found guilty occurred like a day after I published the book. So I'll just update the resources. It's not worth like printing a new copy of the book. It's kind of a small update, but at least I'm interested in like this Mega Markets hack. If you go to the resources section, you'll see, okay, and here's the update. So I think that's like the best way that I can like try to keep up with this. We'll see how long it lasts. But so far, like I'm still excited about it.
It's amazing. Look forward to seeing the updates. I also want to see an intellectual property section specifically. So we can work on that and talk about it.
It's funny. I might need help writing it. I mean, honestly, like of all the areas where I have like a bit of like an experience gap, I'd say is like in I would say like heavy IP, right? Like I've done like I've done a bit of it, but like I don't know like the first thing about patents.
Yep.
Well,
it's interesting. So that and the First Amendment, I think, are areas where we can either get the community public goods funding or community input to collab and expand. And would love to see how this evolves from here. And this is fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah. Absolutely. The book, The Crypto Legal Handbook. The author is Justin Wales. Justin, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful having you on Block and Order, and we hope to have you again. And we look forward to keeping up with you going forward.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right,
Thanks, Justin.
take care. Well, Moish, that about wraps it up for this week's episode of Block and Order. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Please like and subscribe if you like the content. It really helps us out. Special thank you to producer Chris. Without him, we could not make this episode possible. Remember that nothing contained herein is meant to be construed as legal advice or investment advice. Please consult your own advisors and attorneys if you're going to take the plunge down the rabbit hole. I'm Kyle Lawrence.
And I'm Moish Peltz. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.